Hi everyone, this is the last video in the series on environmental security. It's a two-parter. It's going to include a discussion of climate security risks in the United States and the Arctic, and a short follow-on few minutes talking about the future of environmental security. In this video, I'll talk about the specific climate hazards that the United States faces, its social vulnerabilities, and how these combine to generate climate security risks. I'll talk in more detail about the extent to which the Pentagon takes climate change seriously, and then we'll do the same for the Arctic to talk about the specific climate hazards in the Arctic, the social vulnerabilities, and the climate security risks. In the follow-on video, I'll talk about the future of environmental security going forward. In terms of the climate risks that the United States faces, these include drought and more volatile rains. These include flood risk, which includes sea level rise and inundation risk, but also riverine flooding. You also have hurricane risks as well as the risks of wildfires. In terms of the geography of those risks, the hurricanes are mostly affecting the eastern seaboard and the Gulf Coast. You also have those drought risks and wildfire risks, particularly acute in the western United States. And you also have the flood risk distributed broadly, but the Midwest in particular along rivers suffers from those flood risks. In terms of social vulnerabilities, there are inequalities, both class-based and race-based, that affect both income distribution as well as representation in government. You also have climate denialism of sorts that affects both emissions reduction, but may also be impacting the extent to which communities, states, and the federal government are prepared to invest in climate resilience. You also have wider political polarization at the national level that may impinge on the country's ability to take coherent, long-lived action that is sustained across administrations. In terms of climate security risks that emanate from these social vulnerabilities and climate hazards, these include the risk of catastrophic damage to military bases and critical infrastructure that can run into the tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, and divert resources that could have been spent on other purposes for rebuilding. We also see the potential for severe weather emergencies that require military mobilization to prevent large-scale loss of life, which is an opportunity cost of using those militaries to support civilian rescue as opposed to preparing for other national defense emergencies and contingencies. You also have the risks of uninhabitability of some areas, and we can discuss whether this constitutes a national security risk, but the reality is that some areas of the country will have to be vacated through managed retreat and require mobilization and movement of people away from those areas, whether it be islands off the Gulf Coast or off the coast of North Carolina. I think the worry is that, say, with multi-decadal drought in the western United States, that the scale of managed retreat might mean that large areas with large numbers of people might require movement to other areas if water supplies diminish significantly. There are also cascading risks where there are extreme weather events that cause power outages that then in turn impact other sectors like water supplies or transportation systems, and that these catastrophic cascading risks could lead to much more serious and significant impact beyond just the extreme weather emergency itself. So notably, the risks of violent conflict domestically doesn't appear among these anticipated climate security risks, but as I've argued elsewhere, there are climate security consequences outside of conflict that countries have to consider, and the severe impacts of climate change can affect even a wealthy country like the United States in significant ways that damage military infrastructure, that require military mobilization to protect communities from harm, that require whole movements of populations away from uninhabitable areas, and require complex efforts to avoid cascading risks between interlinked systems. And so for all of these reasons, the US is not immune to these climate security impacts. We read a piece by Burnett and Mach on the extent to which the Pentagon is taking climate change seriously, and their findings based on interviews with defense professionals from outside the department as well as insiders suggest that the Department of Defense isn't taking climate change considerations as seriously as outsiders thought they were or should. And this was a function of the fact that outsiders thought climate change was an urgent, imminent threat, and insiders thought as an important problem, but a more distant, future-oriented issue. There were also challenges given the politicization of climate change in the country, that the constancy of policy was subject to change with administration, although there was something of a through line of concern across both Democratic and Republican administrations that climate security concerns, at least with respect to base vulnerability, would require attention. That said, other impediments to addressing climate change more fully in the department included the absence of sufficient resources to follow on planning documents that, while there might be a nod to climate security concerns in some strategic documents, that wasn't true for all strategic documents, and that defense professionals inside the agency needed more actionable data, that it was difficult to translate high-level concerns about climate change into something of use, say at the combatant command or services level. All of these were impediments to taking climate change seriously inside the department, and that was prior to the second Trump administration, when Secretary of Defense Hegseth basically repudiated the department's interest in climate change and eliminated offices like the one I served in Arctic and global resilience. And so while there continues to remain a concern about extreme weather events and base vulnerability, most of the other efforts to integrate climate change concerns into the department have been eliminated. We then turned our attention to the climate security risks in the Arctic, and as before, we started by summarizing the specific climate hazards facing the Arctic, its social vulnerabilities, and then how these manifest in specific climate security risks. In terms of climate hazards, we're aware of melting summer sea ice in the Arctic, which may lead to ice-free summers by as early as the 2030s, and this contributes to more access of sea lanes to transit, and we'll talk more about that. You also have permafrost melt, which is affecting infrastructure in the region. So military bases, critical infrastructure, and roads may be subject to instability. You also have the release of pathogens, of locked up disease vectors that now may be exposed and bring unknown or historically vanquished disease pathogens like anthrax potentially brought and exposing the public to health risks. You also have the extensive risks of wildfires. So all of these may be brought about by changes in the climate in the region. In terms of the region's social vulnerabilities, well, it's distant and remote, and so it makes it difficult to respond to these particular challenges. So if there's an accident to a tourist vessel in the region or an oil spill, it will be difficult to respond to those challenges. You also have small indigenous communities that may be marginalized from governments who face specific risks, like the need for managed retreat that may make it difficult for them to have their needs attended to. You also have the wider harsh conditions in the region that complicates response as much as physical distance. We then talked about the specific climate security challenges facing the Arctic based on these hazards and social vulnerabilities. I would note that even before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that the Arctic was becoming a site for more intense geopolitical rivalry, that the promise of new trade routes, such as the Northern Sea route, made the region more of a place for Russia to try to assert its territorial ambitions over control of these new sea routes, that the sea routes themselves might shorten the distance by as much as 40% compared to transiting over the Suez Canal or the Panama Canal. And so countries that could control the sea routes might be geopolitically advantaged. There's also increased potential for access to resources, including hydrocarbons, minerals, and fish. So there may be geopolitical rivalry over access to those resources. It may also be easier with the new sea routes opening for countries to project power. And so that might mean that the United States would feel its Arctic possessions in Alaska to be more vulnerable to over-the-horizon surveillance and even attack from the Russians, that there are near Arctic countries like China that have aspirations of being players in the Arctic and have supported and invested in some of the port capabilities on the Arctic coastline in Russia. These are among the climate security risks that are emergent. There are others, including the risks of catastrophic disease. There's also the potential for Arctic ice melt and glacier melt to contribute globally to sea level rise. And so that may not manifest in local concerns in the Arctic, but impact other regions. As in other sessions, we talked about what should be done to reduce climate security risks, starting with the risks the United States faces, and then talking about the Pentagon in particular, and finally the risks in the Arctic. So among the strategies that the United States should employ to address its particular climate security vulnerabilities, we talked about better information, more investments in resilience, efforts to harden infrastructure, also efforts to deter rebuilding in highly exposed areas along floodplains or in especially exposed coastal areas like those off the coast of North Carolina. There will need to be greater water conservation in the western United States and other regions facing multi-decadal drought. And in some places, unfortunately, there will have to be choices to support managed retreat where it's no longer possible for human settlement to be viable. There should be other ways that private sector actors need to disclose their climate risks, which might impel them to take those risks seriously in their own planning and operations. You also may need to see more redundancy in backup systems so that those risks of cascading intersections between, say, power systems and transport and data systems are mitigated. There should be more contingency plans and training, both civilian and military operators for disaster risks so that there are active response plans in place to prevent large-scale loss of life and better coordination between civilian and military actors. And then we're also going to need to address those wildfire risks through reduced fire risks, such as at the human-forest interface with better brush management and building codes so that fire risks are contained going forward. In terms of the Pentagon in particular, there should be more actionable data and more prioritization of resources to support climate activities. When I was there, we tried to mainstream climate across a number of planning documents and make it useful and relevant to the particular jobs that climate had a specific impact on. And we also sought to include training in the military educational institutions. Most of that work has been eliminated under the current Secretary of Defense, who is hostile to climate security considerations, but a new effort under a subsequent administration would need to think about the many ways in which climate affects both military infrastructure, training, thinking about Black Flag days and more days of the year in which temperatures are too hot to train, the impacts on military missions, so the increased demands at home and abroad for defense support of civilian authorities, the ways in which climate may impact the resilience of partners and allies, how climate may intersect with strategic objectives and ambitions in places like the Arctic. All of those would need to be taken seriously by a subsequent administration that isn't ideologically opposed to climate change as a concept. In terms of addressing the Arctic's climate security vulnerabilities at the international level, many of the collaborative mechanisms associated with the Arctic Council are on hold as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So political dialogue through that venue has been foreclosed, although some technical discussions continue. Those perhaps need to be revived so that there's better international coordination and planning to reduce geopolitical tension, also to plan for and prepare for disasters in the event of increased transit of oil tankers or tourist vessels, so that there are contingency plans in place to be able to ensure those impacts are mitigated. There may need to be more high-level discussions, and it's not clear that the Arctic Council is the best place for this, to reduce tensions between the U.S. and Russia over the Arctic and how to reduce the likelihood of a spiraling security dilemma and Arctic competition. The U.S., for its part, may need to invest in more of its capabilities so that it's able to defend its interests in the Arctic through icebreakers, which is a long recognized need. There may be specific efforts on the environmental side to limit fishing and limit exploitation of resources extracted from the region, or at least there should be more efforts to negotiate those diplomatically to ensure that there are not sort of skirmishes over access to minerals or fish. All of these are among the strategies that need to be pursued to reduce the risk of the Arctic becoming a flashpoint for geopolitical rivalry.